It's been 8 years since I first joined booktube. I've read a lot of incredible stories throughout these 8 years. In case you don't see some books that you might have expected to see on this list, that's probably because I didn't read them exactly because of booktube, which will be the focus of this video. Recommendations that came directly from you and that I'm so thankful for, because looking at these books makes me really happy, and looking back at the memories from all of these years, it's insane. So thank you. And without any further ado, let's talk books, shall we? Today, all I want to do really is to gush about all of these beautiful stories that have touched me for one reason or another, and I'm currently looking at a stunning pile next to me of books that makes me very happy, because not only is it a recollection of stories that I've loved throughout the years, but it's also a testimony of my booktube history in a way, and that makes me feel very emotional because it has been a while, you know, and just looking at this and trying to remember the moment in time when I was reading these books and not knowing how big of an impact they would make on me. That's incredible to reflect back and think about. So yes, I'm ready to gush about all of them with you. Sorry in advance if I don't discuss the synopsis of these books a lot. I think I'll mainly talk about my feelings and my experience reading them. It will probably be a very long and chatty video, but I love those as well, so. And the first one I have here is a book that I read in, I think, my first year here on booktube, which was 2018, and that is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. A classic, of course. I had heard about this book before. A lot of people were talking about it. I saw it everywhere. There had already been a lot of adaptations, and I do think I saw the first movie adaptation of this book a long time ago, but I had never read the story per se. But because I was just getting started and trying to see what my taste in reading was after taking a huge break, because when I started booktube I had stopped reading for a while. I had just started reading again actually when I started my channel, and so I was still trying to find out and figure out what my taste was, what I was interested in reading, which I am kind of going through that phase again. But at the time it was all so new to me, and classics actually intimidated me a lot, so I thought, why not try some children's classics and see how it goes? And Little Women was one of the first, if not the first, that I read, and I do think it was a great way for me to start, because I had stopped reading for so long. I also stopped reading classics, which was something that I did when I was a teenager. I did read mostly gothic classics and I loved them. But then once you stop, at least for me, it was very hard to get back into them again. And this was a great introduction. I mean, I fell in love with the story, I fell in love with the characters, I felt seen. My favorite character I remember being Beth, because she was very sensitive and quiet and a big introvert who was a music lover. Because of that and her kind heart, she spoke to me a lot. But I of course loved all the sisters and their interactions. Their family dynamic is the most wholesome aspect of the novel. It feels like home when I read this. I have since reread this book. I can't remember if it was once or twice, but at least once. And it always feels like home. I always say that reading this book feels like sitting across a fireplace during a wintry night, getting curled up with blankets and a hot tea and reading the story. That's exactly what it feels like. I love it so much. I still love it to this day. It means a lot to me, and I will forever be thankful for this book because it was one of the first that made me fall in love with reading again. One of the first books that absolutely broke my heart, and this is one that I'm not sure how I would feel about if I read it now, but I remember at the time feeling that I could not put this down, and it was the first time in a very long time for me where after finishing it I could not stop thinking about it. I had a very hard time getting back to reality, because wherever I looked and whenever I tried just moving on with my life, I couldn't, because I was here with these two sisters fighting for their lives, trying to survive what seemed to be an impossible circumstance. And that's The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. this book made me sob at the end because it just, I kind of saw it coming. I remember it being a bit predictable for me, but that didn't matter at all. This follows two sisters during World War II and different forms of strength, because these sisters follow very different paths, and so the way you see their bravery but also sadness and grief is very different, and they both felt very genuine at the time for me. I remember there being a slight romance subplot that I wasn't really a big fan of, but apart from that, I absolutely adored it. And then again, it was very hard to just finish it, and then how was I supposed to get back to my normal life when I had just gotten my heart broken? It was very difficult. I remember a precise moment where I was having lunch with my family, and I must have been like just staring at a wall, because I remember my mother asking, "What's wrong with you? What's wrong? Like, you're just staring, you're not eating anything." And I was like, I'm in Paris right now. I cannot focus on this place. I cannot focus on food. I cannot eat. So it was a very immersive experience, let's say. And then again, I don't know how I would feel about it if I read it now, but I know it was a huge mark on my reading journey. And ever since then, it's one of those books that I still remember the plot quite clearly. Of course, there are some details that I may forget, but these sisters, their behaviors and what they went through, some scenes are very vivid in my mind, and that's a rare thing for a book to achieve, honestly, because usually I forget the plot almost immediately, even if I love the book, but what stays with me are the emotions. But here, there are some scenes that have never left my mind since. So that's The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. And then we have another book that I still don't own, and I desperately want to get a physical copy because I feel like I need it in my collection. But at the time I listened to the audiobook, I don't think I've ever sobbed this much while listening to an audiobook. No, I definitely haven't. And it's never happened since then, because it was too much. And the book was And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Frederick Backman. This follows a man, his son, and his grandson. So we are mainly focusing on the man's perspective and his grandson as well. And the grandpa suffers from dementia. I don't remember exactly like the condition itself, but I do believe it's dementia. He's basically losing his memory and his sense of self. And the entire book, Jesus, I'm getting emotional again. The entire book is one big reflection and lots of dialogue scenes between him and his grandson as he slowly loses himself. And as you can imagine, it is heartbreaking, but it's also beautiful because it explores how meaningful life is and also how short it is, and how we should never take it for granted. We should show kindness and empathy and compassion and spend time with the people we love and tell them we love them and hug them any chance we have, because it slips by so quick. Again, I don't remember the story details necessarily, but I remember I had to stop listening to the audiobook multiple times because I was sobbing, because I was crying too much and too loudly, and I couldn't listen to anything he was saying. So it is still to this day my favorite Bachman that I've read. I've since read Beartown and A Man Called Uwe, something like that. I can never say it properly. Which are also two stunning books. I think Frederick Backman is an exceptional writer. He captures human emotion in a way that I feel like it's very rare, but if it works for you, it will be just the perfect author. My favorite is this one just because of how emotionally devastating but also hopeful it was. So I love that balance, but I would love to keep reading more books by him, because the other two books in particular, I feel like I've read in a very weird time in my life where I wasn't really paying attention to what I was doing, especially when I was reading, because my brain was all over the place. So I would love to give them another try, actually, because I feel like I didn't really appreciate them as much. But this one, I recommend it if you are in a good place to read it. I'm just gonna say that because if you have like experience with this, if any of your family members, for instance, or you know, any close loved ones you have experienced this, it can be really tough. Listening to the story, it was definitely hard for me, but then again, it's just one of those things that just reminds you of no matter how dark and sad and devastating the world can be sometimes, it also has a lot of beauty and magic and good and kind about it, and all of that is worth staying alive for, I would say. So anyway, I'm gonna shut up now, otherwise I will start crying again. The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. I feel like this is a classic of booktube, I would say. This completely blew up. I don't remember if it was 2018 or 2019, something around that. Everyone was reading this, and rightfully so, I would say. This book just opened... I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but I guess it's part of, you know, being a person and growing as a person. This book opened my eyes to a reality that either I didn't really know existed, or I just didn't want to accept it because it was too dark and too horrifying for it to be true, which just showed me that I was certainly living in a very, very, very small, privileged bubble where I had the chance of, you know, closing my eyes and not really think about all those horrifying things happening in the world, which is not the right attitude to have. You should always learn about what's going on. You should always care about what's going on. It doesn't remove the fact of, you know, taking your breaks, obviously, because it's not good to always be consuming bad news, but it is good to be aware of them and to fight for what's right. This book opened my eyes to not only police brutality, but also how extremely unfair the justice system is or can be. Not only this book, of course, but also all the discussions that were happening around it, and it was just an incredibly enlightening experience that I'm glad I had, because ever since then I've become a more informed person, and how important it is to be aware of other people's stories, other people that do not share the same experience as you, that do not look like you, that do not live in the same place as you do, and to create this sense of community where you need to realize that the world is not your bubble. The world is so much bigger than that. So yes, anyway, on one hand, I'm very glad I read this when I did, because it taught me a lot, but also the story. I remember at the time being so captivated by it, mainly due to the protagonist, Star, I think was her name. This poor girl who witnesses the death of her friend for no reason whatsoever other than pure stupid hate. That's it. There's no logical reason at all, which is infuriating, by the way. But following her and how she deals with that, starting there, it's devastating. I remember loving the family aspect in this novel because everyone seemed so supportive. It seemed to be a very close community, and at the time that really touched me as well. And that's one of the reasons why I see it as a classic. I feel like this was a very impactful moment for the booktube community at the time, and it started a very much needed discussion that hopefully will keep going and just make the world a better place. Hopefully we could all use a little less hate, you know, we could all use so much more empathy and compassion and just acceptance of everyone. The world would be such a better place. But anyway, that's The Hate You Give. I'm sure most of you have read this one already as well. Oh my god, okay, another one that broke my heart, of course, because that's the theme here. I do love my sad stories, sad but also heartwarming. And that's The Traveling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arikawa. Oh my god, I'm getting chills. I'm getting chills thinking about this. Yes, the cat name is Nana, I remember that. And then Satoru, exactly. So he is keen to visit 3 old friends from his youth. Though the cat doesn't know why. He just takes her and they go together to visit Satoru's friends from the past, you know, or throughout his life. Apparently, he has the intention of leaving Nana with one of them, or at least he has the intention of, you know, separating from her, not abandon her, but just leaving her somewhere safe, hopefully with one of these people. And the story just goes from there. And first of all, if you are an animal lover, a cat lover, this is a mandatory read. It's so cute. The cat's personality shines through this book. It is so well done. I could picture my cat acting exactly like this. And for someone who's had a lot of black cats in the past, this particularly this particularly broke me because they had a very funny personality, and this cat has as well. They were very sassy and understanding, but also knew their boundaries, and you needed to respect them. That's all I'm gonna say. So the cat's personality is like A+ here, but then also their bond and everything coming together. It was just a roller coaster of emotions. I loved it so much. I remember at the time I also listened to the audiobook while reading the physical copy, and it was a great choice. That's my favorite way of reading just in general. And it is yet again one of those books that I might not remember a lot of the details, but I remember what it did to me and how I was after reading it. To switch the tone a little bit, I'm gonna talk about the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. This is the first book, which is The Final Empire, but I can include just the whole trilogy here because what an experience it was. I remember at the time I was fascinated by all the fantasy channels out there on booktube and the amount of incredible books, at least they seemed so, that they were reading. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I need to try out this genre because I felt that I had never read an epic fantasy series, and this was my first attempt. This one is almost 700 pages. The second one is the book that I've read the fastest in my life, I'm gonna say, in proportion to the number of pages, which I feel like is almost, like it's around 600 or 700 pages, I would say. I must have finished it in like 2 days or even less than that because I could not stop reading. The second book is my favorite, which is not a very popular opinion, I would say. I love all of them, by the way. And the premise is, what if the Dark Lord won? So basically you are entering this world, you are entering the first book of the series in a world where the evil won, the evil guys won. And first of all, that's a fascinating concept. I love it so much because then it creates the necessity of having a rebellion that goes against the system and tries to fight for what's right. Which of course begs the question of what is right and what are the means that you can use to justify your endings and if all of that's valid and everything. But I just loved that premise and I loved these characters so much. Does it have its issues? Yes, it does. And book 2 is my favorite, but it's also the one that has my least favorite character of all time. That's a big statement, but I'm just gonna say it. I think it's the most unnecessary character / plot thing ever. And it's still a 5-star book for me because it's that good. So the political intrigue, all the themes that it explores, I love it so much. And then again, I do think it is one of those series that if I read it now, maybe I would find more flaws in it, and I think I would not care at all because it holds a special place in my heart. I read this very quickly. It made me fall in love with fantasy. I had read a few things before that, but smaller ones and not with this dimension and world building. So I do consider this the start of it all for my relationship with fantasy. And it's not that I have read a lot. I don't think I've read that many fantasy novels, which needs to change. But all the ones I've read, all of my fantasy journey comes to this. It is because of this book and of this series that I completely fell in love with the genre. And nowadays, it's one of my favorites and I want to read more of it. So, highly recommend, especially if you are looking to try out a fantasy series that it's not too intimidating, that it's easy to read, because that's another thing. Here, listen. Sanderson's prose is so easy to digest. I promise you, it doesn't matter how long the books are, you can read them so quickly. So yes, I could gush about it all day long. I've actually been meaning to reread this series, so I don't know when that will happen, because I would love to read the Stormlight Archive as well. I don't know when I will do that, but I really want to. I really want to. Oh, I don't know, but it makes me so happy. Next we have Virginia Woolf's just work in general. I've only read 2 books and I love both of them. Very different from each other. The first one is A Room of One's Own, which I believe is one of the most familiar works by her. I had certainly heard of it before, but it was not until I did a little TBR swap with my friend Sarah back when she made videos as well. She picked a few books for me to read, I picked some for her to read, and one of them that she picked for me was this one, and I'm so glad that she did, because it is a huge mark in feminist history and literature. And of course, I had to read it at some point in my life, and while it does have a few points that are a bit outdated perhaps, or just, you know, a product of their time, it is certainly an amazing read as well. And just like it has maybe some things that didn't turn out to be so well received nowadays, it has so many others that were very advanced for her time and still apply today for sure. So it was my introduction to her work. I immediately loved it, and then I was of course convinced by another friend, Milena, who is a huge fan of Virginia Woolf, to read some more of her books. And I still have only read one, but that, I want to change that. But anyway, one of Milena's favorite books that we ended up reading for a book club together was To the Lighthouse. And let me tell you, I was very scared to read this book because, well, not only because of the pressure of it being a friend's favorite, so I immediately was really hoping not to hate it or dislike it too much, but then again, my expectations were a little high because it is such a well-loved classic, although it does have some mixed reviews, but I know a lot of people who love it as well. But then I knew basically nothing about this novel, only that it was a little bit on the maybe surrealist side and magical realism-ish, and that was all. This ended up being a 5-star for me and one of my favorite books from that year, which is insane when you go into a book not knowing exactly what to expect and being kind of scared that you will dislike it, and then it turning up to be a favorite. It's insane. I will say this is one that I will want to reread at some point because it's very easy to miss a lot of things, in my opinion, when you first read this story, but all the imagery here is just fantastic. And there's one chapter, or rather one scene in particular, that will not leave my mind, I don't think ever. It is incredibly well written and very fun to discuss in a book club as well. I'm so glad we read it together and that I loved it as well. Hopefully sooner than later I will reread it and get even more from it, but it was amazing. If you haven't read it yet, I would recommend it. Just be prepared for it to be, you know, not a very linear story, but very, very much worth your time, for sure. The Lies of Locke Lamore. Let's talk about some fantasy again. This book by Scott Lynch is the first one in the Gentleman Bastard series, and have I read the sequels? No. But I really want to because I loved this book. Again, I was not sure I was going to. Not because of the premise necessarily, because it is a heist story and apparently it was supposed to be very character driven, which it was, let me tell you. But there had always been something about it that I felt a little hesitant about. I didn't have any reason to. This was incredible, and mainly because of the characters. I mean, the plot is insane. It starts immediately with an insane scene that puts you right into this world, and you immediately get to learn more about the characters you're about to follow, specifically 2 of them at the start. And then suddenly you have this very quirky group of characters that you care oh so much about, even though they haven't been doing a lot of good things, you know. But then the relationships these characters form, and then the emotional moments that at least I was not expecting at all. I was having so much fun with this book. I was laughing, I was having a great time, and then suddenly it just hit me with some scenes that I did not see coming, and I had to reread a few times just to make sure I was reading it correctly. I did also listen to the audiobook, which added a lot to the experience for sure. But anyway, I am looking forward to reading the sequels. I do own the next one. I just need to refresh my memory on a few details, I guess. But then I just need to do it. Okay, let's talk about The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I believe I read this one for a Patreon readathon after it being recommended to me multiple times, and it's a story that I've always been intrigued about, especially because I did see the adaptation, The Haunting of Hill House. Is that the name? Is it the same name? It is. I think it is. Anyway, I watched that show. I really like it. I think it's really, really well done, and I might rewatch it again this October, actually. It's perfect for the time of the year. Anyway, I really enjoyed the show. I was aware that it wasn't really similar to the book, but it did have, some connection to it. And ever since then, I've been curious, definitely. But then people kept recommending it to me. But little did I know that what I was getting from it was a beautiful and soul-crushing interpretation of what mental health looks like, especially with someone who is not really heard by other people and feels very alone, and how that represents the horror in this novel. It is brilliant. It made me cry. And I'm not sure if that's a very far-fetched interpretation of this story, but that's how I saw it, and I remember it having a huge impact on me when I read it. I probably just read this one during the right time, during a time where I needed it. The fact that her suffering was being paralleled in the house as well, which became a character, and that's one of my favorite things when places become characters as well. The fact that you could see her feelings mirror in the house was beautiful, and Shirley Jackson has a way of writing that makes everything feel so real. I felt like I was inside this house, looking at the same things that the characters were, questioning myself as well, whether or not I was seeing something or hearing something. It's very atmospheric, very vivid, and very slow, which is it is a very common critique that I see for this book. Maybe because people are expecting it to be very scary and very on the nose, I would say, which is not. It is very subtle. It's almost like having that feeling of sitting or sleeping or whatever at an old house where nothing really is happening, but it is dark and you hear some creaking, you hear some weird sounds that are probably just, old pipes or something, or the floor, precisely because it's old, but it makes you feel a little unsettled. That's the feeling that I got from this book, and that's my favorite type of horror, is the one that you create in your head, let's say, or I should say that's my favorite depiction of horror, the anticipation that you create in your mind, and that's what this felt like to me. Mix that with the representation of mental health, and you have this beautiful, I think this book is just absolutely incredible. It exceeded my expectations completely, but it is very slow and it is very subtle. So if that's not your thing, I completely understand. But if it is, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. I love it so much. It did become one of my favorite classics, and just like it happened with To the Lighthouse, this is one that I will want to reread, because I'm sure I missed a few details here and there. I'm completely sure of that. It's very easy with stories like this to miss things, because a lot of the important things are left unsaid or are in between lines, so I would love to eventually reread it. And plus, I adore this cover so much. It is so beautiful. Speaking of both favorite classics and book that I was not exactly sure what to expect from, next we have Middlemarch by George Eliot in this beautiful new Wordsworth edition. I recently got this one from Elena's bookshop, and it is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. I've read this book with Kira back then. We did have a little book club where we read big books. We read this one and also It by Stephen King, which did not go so well for me, but this one I loved, and I also didn't know what to expect. We wanted to read it mainly because it was on both of our TBRs. It was a big classic that we figured could be fun to discuss together with all of you, of course. So we just did it, and it was so much fun, first of all, to discuss this book with so many people who joined us, and that was years ago, which is insane. But then also because I was pleasantly surprised with this one, and it is now one of my favorite classics as well. It is a beautiful character study filled of character details and frustrated love set in an English old town. It is so beautiful. I hardly remember any of the plot details because, again, it has been so long. But I do remember finishing it and wanting more. And the book is really long, so you can imagine how good it was for me to feel this way. It's one of those books where I felt like the characters could jump out from the page at any point because they were real people. What do you mean these people don't exist? What do you mean? I was rooting for some of the relationships here, which is something that is very hard to achieve, unfortunately, in books nowadays for me. But this is one of those cases where I was cheering for the romance. I was frustrated by some of them, but I also could see why they were acting the way they were. It's a book that makes you feel empathetic towards people, but also realize that the circumstances are not helpful to most of them, while you recognize that some of them might even be a bit silly or make, not so much sense. You can always see where they're coming from, and the dynamics that are established between each character and then the couples themselves. Because if I remember correctly, there are 3 main couples here throughout the story that have very different dynamics between each other, how that created for such an intricate story, and it was so much fun. So adding to the fact that I loved this book, I also loved discussing it. I'm so glad that I had some company to buddy read it because, it took some motivation at the start, but then it was so easy to read and so easy to follow. I know it looks intimidating, but if you've been even considering slightly to read it, then do give it a chance. I promise it's not as intimidating as it looks. Really enjoyed it. And once again, how amazing is it when you don't know what expectations to have for a story and it ends up surprising you so much. That's one of the best feelings, if you ask me. Another author highlight for me is Juliet Marillier, and the first book that I read by her was Daughter of the Forest. This one had already been recommended to me a lot from a friend, a not online friend, and of course partially I did read it because of her, because she was so passionate about Juliet Marillier's series, particularly this book, so I was already pretty hyped to read it. But then also suddenly the corner of booktube that I watch, a small section of it, started to read her books and gushing about them, so that was my final push. And I'm so glad I did that because these books have become a source of comfort to me. They are usually inspired by Celtic mythology, they are set in the woods, they follow mythical creatures, and all of that represents a world in which I would love to live in. This is actually not my favorite book by Juliet Marillier, despite me absolutely loving it. It is inspired by the Seven Swans fairy tale. I'm not sure if that's exactly the name, but I love how much agency the female protagonist has in here, despite the conditions that she finds herself in. It's incredible. It was such a captivating read, and because of this book, I actually started reading another series by Juliet Marillier, which was the Blackthorn and Grimm trilogy, with the first one being Dreamer's Pool, and I do think this one is my favorite book by Juliet Marillier. The trilogy as a whole, I didn't love the second book, but I did enjoy the third one a lot. This one I think is still my favorite, and that might also be because of the audiobook, which is 6 stars, 7 stars. It's incredible. The voices that both the narrators do fit the characters so well, and it just became a very, very immersive reading experience for me. I could not stop reading it when I started it, and I immediately got the other 2 books. It was one of those series, one of those stories that I fell absolutely in love with. And then again, with all the nature-inspired elements, how nature can treat you well or not, depending on how you treat it as well. The whole fairy and other creatures as well, which might not be what you imagine decent, I guess. I will say the plot sometimes it does have a few holes and a few, it gets a bit convenient here and there, but the characters are the magic of these stories, in my opinion. Do they have a lot of flaws? Yes. I can see why people wouldn't like these books. They can be a little slow sometimes. I do think they tend to repeat themselves a little bit. I've only read this trilogy and then the first 2 books of the Seven Waters series. This has, I believe it's 7 or 8 books, which I still need to read the rest of. And I also read 2 more books by Juliet Marillier. I can definitely see a certain pattern there, so I would understand if people found them a bit repetitive, but when all of those common things represent a source of comfort to you, like they do for me, you will not mind it all that much. I need more of them. And I know she will be releasing, I think it is either her final book or final series, and I need to get it immediately. Also, let me just adjust the camera a little bit. I feel like I'm too far away from you. Wait. This is what you get when you film in lots of different days. There you go. I feel like that's better. Anyway, highly recommend Juliet Marillier if you like whimsical books, if you like slow fantasy, character-focused stories, if you don't mind a little bit of plot conveniences here and there. That has to do with the magic as well. Interpret this as a fairy tale where sometimes things just happen because they can. The characters are amazing though, very endearing, and I would personally recommend this book more, but I know people usually start with Dora of the Forest, and I think that's a great way to start as well. So that's my recommendation. I love it so much. On a completely different note, I have Crying in Age Mart by Michelle Zauner. This also got a lot of hype in booktube around this time, which I don't remember exactly when that was, but a lot of people were reading this memoir, and memoirs are just in general some of my favorite nonfiction books to read, and this one talked about, what I've heard about that was that it followed Michelle Zauner's grieving after her mother had passed, and it also talked a lot about their relationship with food, which I thought was a very sweet element of the book. And then I read it and it completely destroyed me. I think I read this book where I was, for some reason, I always read it when I was in the midst of the business of the city, and I was listening to the audiobook as I was walking through the streets of Lisbon, and it was a very strange experience because I was listening to this heartbreaking book. When you're going through grief, you experience so many different emotions all at once, and they're all valid and should be, taken care of. You should allow yourself to have some time to process all of that, and it can take up to years, sometimes, and that's completely fine. But I was reading about this woman trying to deal with not having her mother anymore and how conflicted some of her emotions were, which was heartbreaking. And at the same time, I was just looking at the world, rushing, all the people walking in a hurry somewhere, people laughing in the background and chatting and being happy, and I was like, this is what life is about, isn't it? Here I am listening to a heartbreaking story about someone who's been through so much, while some other people are probably having some of the best days in their lives. And that's somewhat beautiful, I would say. But anyway, about the book, yes, it does have some very beautiful lines, reflections about not having someone there anymore with you, but having their presence, through some other things. And it was very engaging as well. I read it completely through the audiobook and loved it so much. I read it again because of a recommendation of Virginia. She's been a supporter of my channel for so long, one of the loveliest people ever, and she did send me this book for Christmas one year, and I think I read it just the year after, and loved it. And I'm so grateful that it was booktube that introduced me to this book, and then so many people started recommending it, then I was gifted it. It was such a beautiful experience all around. Then we have what is probably one of the weirdest experience I've ever had, because I was not expecting to enjoy this book so much. I mean, from the premise, I figured I would like it, but there was something about it that really spoke personally to me, and that has to do, I'm not sure I can fully say what it is without spoiling it, but it has to do with a relationship that the protagonist has throughout the book that becomes very relevant. And I have a similar relationship with someone else in my life who I would basically do anything for, and if that means crossing magical barriers and isolating myself in a room This doesn't make sense if you haven't read it, by the way. But yes, it is a metaphor basically for what it would do for someone else, and I thought that aspect was very beautiful. I didn't even say the title, did I? This is Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Mizuki Tsujimura. So yes, it starts out as a very weird book where we have this cast of characters that travel between realities, and at first I was not exactly sure where the story was going, but then the final scene, the final message hit, and something in it just blew me away a little bit, or at least made me feel very emotional over this relationship in particular. We read this for a book club at the time, and I believe I was the only person who really enjoyed it, or maybe the other girls did as well, but I'm pretty sure I was the one who enjoyed this book the most, and maybe I just read it when I needed it, probably, but yes, it is a strange little book that seems very random at first, but in the end it really speaks up about what it means to love and what it means to be lonely. It talks about friendship, it talks about being misunderstood. It is sold as YA, and it does read YA. It's very accessible, very easy to read, but I did also find it very meaningful, and now that I'm speaking about it, I do think it spoke to my teenage self as well. Some scenes here that kind of reminded me of some things that I went through, and sometimes I wish I could have escaped like these characters did, but at the same time thinking about what good, what positive things could that really have brought to my life. So I don't know, I guess this book just remained with me. I was not expecting it to be so revolutionary in my life, but it was, and I really appreciate it for what it is. So speaking on a very different note, but a book that made me cry, and this is one of those books that I feel like people find very basic sometimes, and then there's me, who just finds it so pure and wholesome. And, you know, we live in a world that is becoming very consumed by hate and violence and prejudice. And sometimes you just need to be reminded that there's beauty and kindness and empathy in the world. And I feel like that's what The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse do. This is by Charlie Maxey. And it is just the most wholesome thing. It is filled of cute, tiny illustrations all throughout the book with little sentences just reminding you of what I believe are the real goals in your life, you know? Which is to be kind to yourself and to others, to do your best and to not be scared of falling, because you will always have people around you who love you and that will help you get through. It is one of those books, it's just the most adorable little thing, and I get that maybe it's nothing new, you know, maybe it just tells you things that you already know, but those things are sometimes the more obvious things, I feel like, sometimes are the ones that you need to listen to the most at certain points in your life. Maybe when you are struggling to see the good in people and in the world. At least I'm speaking personally. When I feel very, very overwhelmed by so many things that are happening right now, right? I think we all know what's going on. People are getting so hateful out of ignorance or prejudice usually, and it's so sad to see the world going into that place. So in times like those, sometimes I struggle to, you know, keep going or to be hopeful or have a more positive attitude every day, or try and romanticize my life as much as I can when there's so much hate going on. It's really hard and it's overwhelming. So sometimes the most obvious things become not so obvious. And it's books like this one, I feel like, that ground me a little bit and that remind me that no, life is worth it. We need to be here. We need to keep fighting, always use our voice and use our hearts to be here for each other. And I don't know, I feel like this book is one of those very cute, easy reminders that you can have in your life, and it really touched me at the time. I have since then read it one more time, I believe, and I feel like it's one of those that I will always reread at some point, you know, always. Things like you have this page with just a simple illustration, and what it says is, "What is the bravest thing you've ever said?" asked the boy. "Help," said the horse. And it continues, "When have you been at your strongest?" asked the boy. "When I have dared to show my weakness." "Asking for help isn't giving up," said the horse. "It's refusing to give up." And I'm getting teary-eyed. Anyway, so it's little messages like those that I feel like sometimes we just need to hear and read again and again and again to keep going, because it's so important. And yes, it's good for me to remind myself of my values and who I want to be. And if you read it, I hope it can give you the same feeling as well. Speaking of meaningful lives, here's a book that asks that question over and over and over again. What is the purpose of life? What is a meaningful life? Stoner by John Williams. I was expecting to really enjoy this book. I was not expecting it to have the effect that it had on me. It's a very quiet, almost silent book, very introspective. You're following this teacher called Stoner, just going through his life, struggling with its many different aspects and questioning what is the point of all of this. And sometimes, that's one of those questions that I feel like you can never exactly know how to answer. It's an answer that probably changes over time. The more you grow, the more you experience things. I feel like that changes all the time. And this book, there's something about it that just paints that so well. Because then again, it's so quiet. Nothing really happens in terms of being plot heavy, but at the same time, so many things happen because it's all in this man's head, his interpretations, his inner struggles, while going through an unfair school system, while going through failed romantic relationships, while going through personal development and what that even means. It's a very interesting novel that I feel like, again, I'm really glad I read it for a book club. I feel like a lot of these books were picked for book clubs, and I'm very glad they were, because this is the sort of book that really begs for a discussion. You could have so many different interpretations and ways of looking at this story. I do understand people that do not like it all that much. I completely get that. But the thought of a very simple person, as he describes himself, very simple, very an unlikely hero, I would say, where he's trying to fight in his own way against the unfairness of this world, even with all the disappointments that he has in his life. I feel like there's always a lesson that we can grab from those. There is a discussion to have about how much agency this protagonist has, because a lot of the times he doesn't seem to have any. But then you start questioning if that's even true and what even means to have any agency, because not having it is also a choice in some circumstances. So it is described as a deeply moving novel, a work of quiet perfection, one that I would like to reread at some point. Again, some of these books are perfect for a reread because some stories you need to read again and have other perspective about to gain more from it, and this is one of them. I mean, I guess you could say that about all books and all stories, of course, but this one I feel like can be very relatable even in different stages of our life, and not necessarily because we have a similar life, but because despite our experiences, we still might feel as isolated and lost as he is. So, and speaking of great discussions, we have Little by Edward Carey, which we also read for a book club at the time. I decided to pick this book because one of my favorite creators, Ruby Granger, she was mentioning it during one of those beautiful long videos, the wrap-up videos that she usually does. And when she talked about this book, I was very curious. It follows the early years of the child and the woman that then became known as Madame Tussaud. And you can see right from the start the fascination that she has for the human body, medically speaking, how it works, how it functions, what it looks like on the inside. There's a lot of imagery around the entire book. I don't find particularly disturbing. These are just body parts, literally, but I have seen some people being a bit disturbed by them, which is interesting because that's also something that is talked about in this book, is why we would be so upset or disturbed or weirded out just looking at body parts, because they're part of all of us, and it's what makes all of us equals, the same, which again introduces another theme, which is how equal are we really as human beings and what that even means. And then the aftermath of that, when they start, exposing those bodies, just refined, for the museum, it's interesting to see different people's reactions, because some of them were very appalled by the fact that there were bodies being displayed for everyone to see, especially of people that were not really good when they were alive. So there's also that moral question, if everyone deserves to be, seen and or praised, but also why we would have such a strong reaction to seeing what our nature looks like. So both those dimensions, both the philosophical, moral one and the more medical aspects, they intertwine in a very interesting way in this book. I had never read anything like this. Again, another book that I want to reread because it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see the multitude of themes that are explored here. It's insanely interesting. Definitely a bit of a weird book as well at some points, but it fits the tone so well. When we read this, I thought it could be a horror novel, but that's just, again, why did I think this was going to be a horror novel? Just because it involves bodies? That's a weird assumption, I would say. Also maybe usual for people to think like that, but should we? Why would we? So, even my own reaction to the book begs that question. Anyway, I'm rambling at this point. This was super interesting, and I'm very grateful I saw it through booktube and got the chance to read it, because I don't think I would have read it otherwise. I had never seen it before. I don't really see a lot of people talking about it now, so another underrated gem, I would say. I also listened to Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is a book I remember so well. When I first started listening to it, I felt so claustrophobic. I feel like the first few chapters, there's immediately a scene that you cannot really stop listening to, because you're so scared. I was so scared about what was about to happen, and it immediately puts you in the shoes of the protagonist, which was, unfortunately, a very terrifying place to be. This is a topic that interests me a lot, because it talks about the music industry and how, unfortunately, a lot of abuse can happen there, especially when it comes to younger people who are just starting out, which was the case for the protagonist of this book. So it is something that interests me, because music is one of my biggest passions. I have studied it, and unfortunately I am familiar with the fact that this happens a lot in this industry. And here we follow just how easy it is to fall into that trap, but also of how essential it is to keep having this conversation that we should never, ever, ever, ever blame the victim. And unfortunately, this is a conversation that it's still not obvious, and it should be. And that's a lot of where the book comes from. It can be quite triggering, I will say. It was for me, especially those first few chapters. So it was definitely hard to listen to sometimes. But in the end, this is a powerful story about a woman who's trying to make her name of herself, who's trying to follow her dreams, and how she overcomes what happened, basically. So we, unfortunately, still need to read a lot of stories like this one. We need to be aware of so many things, honestly, but, specifically here, all the abuse that happens and how much the conversation or the angle of the conversation as to guilt really needs to shift. So highly recommend this one. And speaking about this topic, since we are here, I've also read My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell, which again is this even more so, I would say, is about an abusive relationship between a teacher and his student. And at the time, this student didn't realize that she was in an abusive relationship. It was very romanticized by the teacher, of course. She was being manipulated and gaslit, so it is absolutely soul-breaking, and especially because you follow two timestamps, her when she was younger and having this relationship, and then when she's older, reflecting on that and coming to terms with the fact that she was indeed manipulated and abused by her teacher. And this is, I feel like, a crucial portrayal of what it must feel like to not realize what you've been through, especially for this long. It's a very hard book to talk about. I do not want to go much into it, also because I know, again, it can be very triggering, but I cautiously recommend it to everyone because I do genuinely feel like this is a very considerate, respectful approach to this topic. And I also appreciate how it talks about the fact that it's not easy for someone who's been through this to, speak up and talk about it. That must be a terrifying place to be at. And the fact that, again, there are still people out there who blame the victim for either or both for not only being in this relationship and, getting into it, then not speaking up about it and talking about what happened and, making a formal complaint about the abuser. It's really, really sad and frustrating. We should be protecting the ones who are abused and not the other way around, not blaming them. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. I did want to shout out both of these books, Grown and My Dark Vanessa, because they somewhat touch similar manners. This one is more focused on it, I would say, at least from what I can remember, but they both touch on it. They both talk about the consequences of it, or possible consequences, and how much of an important discussion this still is. In case it wasn't implied enough, I do strongly recommend you to check out the trigger warnings for both these books. This one is more graphic. It's really upsetting, really unsettling, so just be aware of that, please, before you read it. But if you are in a good place, I do recommend you to do so, because from what I can remember, it was a very realistic and empathetic portrayal of these situations. So let's change it up a little bit with this humongous, beautiful book, and that's Babel by R.F. Kuang, An Arcane History. It asks the question of whether or not there needs to be violence in order to achieve translation, and that was a very good, compelling way of putting it, because then it opens up a million other themes that are explored here, such as racism, of course, and privilege and colonialism. Everything you can think about, all of that in between, it's here, and it's so well done. I've heard a lot of negative reviews about this book saying that the characters were not developed enough, and I agree to some extent. I do think it worked for the purposes of this book, because it's definitely more about the themes and critiques that it's making rather than the story itself on its own. It's insane how much research goes into this book. I was fascinated reading all the footnotes in it. Usually I would say that would not work for me either, but that's precisely the point of this book. I feel like it's through this story and through these characters and through their different conditions reflect about the state of the world as well, how it's been, how it still is, and this information never felt pointless or irrelevant. It all contributed to enrich the purpose of this book, and it was great. I don't know how much else I can say about this book that hasn't been said already. All I can say is I do recommend it. The story doesn't live by itself. I do think the story is a mechanism for R.F. Kuang to share the message that she wants, and that's perfectly valid in my opinion. I really loved how she crafted the story and how it is a mirror for a lot of tendencies that we are witnessing currently in the world. So even if you don't love it, I think you will find at least something useful in it, or food for thought, and that's the most important thing about this book, I feel like. Speaking of discussions of privilege, we have Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. This book, I don't think I've ever cringed so much reading a book, for good reasons. It was definitely on purpose, but it worked. I was both laughing and cringing all at the same time, and it was very weird, and I think that was exactly what Kylie Reid was proposing with this book, and it worked so well. This follows a black woman called Emira who works as a babysitter for a white rich family, and the dynamic between Emira and Alex, who is the wife/mother in the family, you know when you're so uncomfortable but that all you can do is to laugh at how ridiculous people are being, or try and hide yourself, because at the same time I was laughing, and at the same time I wanted to dig a hole and hide myself there because it was so strange, and the way that Kylie Reid writes the characters they feel so genuine to me. I could not believe, when I finished the book, I could not believe these people did not exist. I still do not accept that. I don't know how that's possible. This feels too real. And that's funny in a way, but also sad and ridiculous. Why do people act like this? Acting as if Amira was her toy, almost. It's insane. And when you combine that with so many messy plots that happen throughout the story, this makes for a very entertaining read. I will say that. It has so many funny moments, cringe-worthy moments as well. And overall, it's so much fun to read, but it also puts you in a place where it's like, I cannot believe some people act like this. I cannot believe, I hope I've never acted like this. Maybe I have in the past, you know, that's the thing, because then you start questioning yourself. It's like, have I been this person before? I hope not. I really hope not. Because it's so bad. It's so bad. But anyway, I love it, how hilarious this book can be, while also giving a very impactful message about privilege and what that means, and how people sometimes don't see how privileged they are, I guess. It's not the type of book that I usually gravitate towards. Contemporary is not usually something that I read a lot, but this was getting high reviews, and I believe I found it at the book fair, and I couldn't resist. And I'm so glad I didn't, because it's a bit outside my comfort zone, but it just proves that sometimes that's all you need, because I had such a good time reading this book. It's yet again one of those that I couldn't stop reading. It's very short, very easy to read. The story is captivating. It has some emotional moments. You keep switching perspectives. I tried understanding everyone's perspectives, but sometimes it was really painful to see the thought process of certain characters and how flawed it is and how much they still need to grow, which we all do, I guess, of course, always, and we should always strive to do that. But to the point where it really made me feel uncomfortable was an experience, let me tell you that. Changing the mood again. A book that has not left my mind ever since I finished it. It was a recommendation from one of my lovely patrons. It was picked for the TBR jar that we have going on, and when it was selected, I read it, and I cannot stop thinking about this book. Burial Rites by Anna Kent. This follows Agnes, who was, I believe, the last woman in Iceland to be sentenced to death penalty for a murder that she supposedly committed. And what I love about this book is that it's not about whether or not she actually did it. It's about people's perception about her and how spreading rumors and unbased beliefs can change someone's life completely. And it of course also touches on how unfair the justice system can be, how unfair it is that people might be sentenced without any proof, or without even trying to realize if they did it, why they did it, and how they would have done it. So the fact that it focuses so much around gossip and not facts is fascinating to me, because then you follow Agnes' perspective and how she's feeling in the middle of all of this. And it's a very isolating book because of that, but just, you know, the power that words can have is insane. And we're talking just word of mouth, and that's it. You know how the book ends because you are told from the beginning. You're left with this lingering feeling of just emptiness, because you start caring for this woman and you don't know what happened. You don't know the real story. She gives you some hints. Like, it's such a cold book. I could feel myself in this house with the wind and rain and snow around me. You can feel Agnes's pain. You can feel how alone she feels. And at the same time, you're just wondering, like, what happened? What happened? And it's desperate. I was desperate because I felt completely empty. I didn't know how to react to this. I felt horrified for her. I don't know, it builds up to this big mystery, but then it's not really about that mystery, because it's not about finding the answer. It's, you know, coming to terms with the accepted answer, and how do you live with that? So it's unsettling. It's so unsettling. There's a theme here. I know. I love my sad books. My sad, unsettling books. But it is, and it is so good. It is so well written. I love it and I hate it all at the same time. I don't know how to process this story. Basically, that's it. I don't know how to process it, but it's so good. We're almost there. We're almost there. Let's talk about something happy for a change. And that's Chocolate by Joanne Harris. While it also has its emotional moments, because of course it has, but to me, this is also, just like with Juliet Marillier, this is the definition of a comfort story to me. And this book in particular, I don't know if it is all the chocolate descriptions that might have something to do with that, but I just feel so warm and cozy inside when I read this story and when I watch the movie as well. The adaptation is so good. I don't exactly remember like the similarities and differences between the book and the movie, but I know I love both. And there's a magic to this book that I can't quite put my finger on what that is, but it has such a soothing effect on me. And again, might have to do with the chocolate as well. But I do think it's also because this book, in the end, to me, is about community, is about coming together for a common cause, and it's about showing kindness even in the hardest of times, and how that can be the light in the middle of all the darkness. In the simplest ways, sometimes all that means is giving a free cup of hot chocolate to someone who's in need of a hug. And that hot chocolate can represent the hug that that person needed at that exact moment. And if you give them 5 minutes of your time to chat at a coffee shop about nothing, you know, it doesn't have to be about anything. And that's the feeling that this book encapsulates. And I adore it with all my heart, and I don't know how else to explain it, because it is just about pursuing empathy, which to me has always been the most important thing in the world. This book reflects that so well, and again, it is in the smallest gestures. Sometimes a person is going through the worst day in their lives, and if you give them just a moment of your time, it makes it so much better for that person. And I love how food comes into play with that. And I also love the contrast between chocolate being a source of comfort for some people, while also being the representation of sin for others. There's a lot of discussions about that too, how it is seen as something forbidden because it's something that people, you know, lose themselves in, I guess. That's not my favorite aspect exactly, but it's interesting to see it here as well. Yes, it says a church, not chocolate. So, you know, because of the religious themes as well. That's not my favorite part of the book exactly, but it adds for a fun background in this small village, which is also another one of my favorite things, is when books are set in very small places. So everyone knows each other. You cannot really escape. You cannot really have secrets. Not really. Everything's out in the open. And that makes for a very fun dynamic between the characters. There's also a slight element of magical realism in this book, which I love. And so it is the whole package. I love it with all my heart. It is a very heartfelt book. It has so much soul. It has so much personality. And I love that in the end, it is about being there for other people. This woman, Vivian, the owner of the chocolatier, I should say, she experiences so much because she's always there, you know, so she talks with everyone in the village. She gets to know each person's story, and they create such a beautiful relationship as well. The people, Vivian, and the coffee shop, that place becomes a comforting space for people to go to and just chat a little bit. So yes, not to repeat myself too much, I just love the community aspect of this book, and how we should always strive to be better people and be there for others. That's it. And other than that, of course, the descriptions of food, amazing. I always get hungry when I read the book, but especially when I watch the movie, because you have all the visuals, of course, going on. And I just love it. I love it so much. It instantly became one of my favorite books, which was kind of predictable because then again, I love the movie. So, and going back to Heartbreak again, this is We Are Not Free by Tracy Chee, and this follows a group. Wait, let me check the. Yes, exactly. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, this follows a group of Japanese American teenagers. So with that setting alone, you can only imagine what heartbreak this entails. However, it is also such a sweet book at the same time. This group of friends is the most wholesome thing. And the book captures that as well. This strange reality that these teenagers have to cope with, where there's so much war around them, but in their own little bubble, they feel safe and they feel loved. I don't really know what else to add at this point about these things, because I feel like a lot of the books that I love do have this, but, you know, again, just how sad it is that we live in a world with so many wrong things happening and so much destruction, so much hate. But at the same time, you can have this beautiful reality with people who love each other and are trying to survive together in these circumstances. There's some funny chapters here where you get to see their genuine dynamics as friends, because each one of them is going through very important stages in their lives. I mean, they are teenagers, they are trying to figure out who they are, and each one of them had a very unique personality as well. I would not have read this book if it wasn't for booktube. Again, I read it for a book club. I wouldn't even know that this book existed, which would be very, very sad. And I do want to read more books by Tracy Chee. She captured just the genuine happiness that it is being around your friends in your own little bubble, but then the heartbreaking reality that was around them. So, and please check the trigger warnings. I feel like I keep saying this, but I just want to make sure you are in a good place to read this. It is not, from what I can remember, it is not particularly graphic, but it does mention a lot of things, so just be aware of that. But I really enjoyed this, and again, I feel like it is very underrated actually. Let me know if you've read this one actually, and if you've read any other books by Tracy Chee, please let me know if you have recommendations. I would love to hear them. A not so underrated book, and unfortunately my copy is getting a little bent, but it still works. It's beautiful, I love it, and it is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. I love this so much. James Baldwin, is he now one of my favorite writers? He can't be. I've only read this book. He will be though, because his prose is magnificent. This happened to me with Oscar Wilde when I read The Picture of Dorian Gray. Here I kind of wanted to underline every single line in the book because it was so beautifully written. It's set in Bohemian Paris, let's say, about two male lovers. But let's just say one of them is still in the process of not only processing but also accepting his own sexuality, and that has a lot to do, of course, with societal pressure and unfortunately what would happen to gay people at the time if they were out. And so this book has a very beautiful metaphorical setting as well, because Giovanni's room, while it is a physical room where these two lovers would meet, it is also, you know, a symbol for the only safe space that they really had to really be themselves and explore their sexuality freely. And I'm speaking about it, I don't have good enough words to describe this book. It is so powerful and it is so short. It always baffles me when a book is so short and can say so much. But yes, just coming to terms with who he is, it's very sad because you can definitely feel some internalized homophobia, which you can't help but understand, you know, taking into consideration the conditions in which queer people lived and how he was raised as well. I believe, well, is that a spoiler? That's the thing, I'm not sure exactly what I can say about this book without spoiling it, but there's a lot of reasons for him to act this way towards himself, which is heartbreaking, of course, and Giovanni represents not only a sort of freedom to David, but also a form of danger in a lot of ways, and that balance that James Baldwin describes so well is insane. I feel like, how many times can I say the word heartbreaking in one video without being too repetitive? Just a sentence about this book. Love can be dishonest. Why do you do this to me? I will add that I needed to take a moment after reading this book, because I needed to process it and I needed some time alone to do so, because what I had just read was a masterpiece and I knew it right when I finished it. 5 stars all around. Love it so much. How many times can I say that as well? Anyway, we are right at the end, and I promise this was not in any particular order, but I am kind of glad we ended on this note, because the final book, or rather books, and author as well, that I need to shout out is none other than J.R. Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings series. This, granted, this series came highly, highly, highly recommended to me even before I started booktube. A lot of my friends in my life had recommended this to me. A lot of them were shocked that I had never read or seen the movies before. I watched them later when I finally read the books. I think it must have been around 2021, maybe 2022. So this is a little insane to reflect back at the impact that the series, these characters have had on me. I have, since starting this series, I have read The Hobbit, I have read the entire Lord of the Rings series, I have read The Silmarillion, I've read poetry by Tolkien, I've read Beren and Luthien, which is one of the best love stories ever written. I've read the Unfinished Tales, I've read The Children of Urin, and more that I now cannot remember exactly, but I know I've read more. It's been an insane Tolkien journey, and it all started with Letters from Father Christmas. That's the first book that I read by Tolkien. But then, you know, again, just like with Giovanni's Room and other books that I mentioned, what can I say about The Lord of the Rings that hasn't been said already? Nothing, probably. Absolutely nothing. It is a classic. I want to cry. I want to cry. Why am I already crying? I haven't even talked about the Hobbits yet. I was expecting to cry when I was about to mention the Hobbits, but no, it's starting now. Anyway, I hope you're ready for just a gush fest, because this is what this is. This is what the whole video is about. I love gushing about my favorite stories. I love it. And this is definitely like a favorite of all time. No question about that. It is just as beautiful and as magical and as perfect as people kept telling me throughout the years. And I was stubborn enough not to read it or watch it for a long time, because I had so many people telling me that I would love it, completely fall in love with this world. I felt very pressured. I was scared that I was not gonna like it. Can you imagine? That would have been dramatic. But that didn't happen, fortunately. I had the time of my life reading this series. It was just... Anyway, why it's on this video is because the final push that I had was because of booktube, specifically because of my friend Lucy, who's, you know, the reference for Tolkien if you ever need one. And she was the final push that I needed, I guess. And it's just been such an incredible journey getting to know these characters. I now officially want to be a hobbit. That's my life goal. I want to live in the Shire and have 2 breakfasts. That's the kind of life that I aspire to have. I want to have my close circle of friends. I want to work with the close community. I want to own a farm and take care of animals. That's my dream. That's my life goal. I want to take care of the animals. I want to live a simple yet meaningful life. I want to read my books. I want to have a fireplace at my house. I don't know. I don't know. It's the simple joys in life, isn't it? And all the themes about fellowship, of course, companionship, friendship, loyalty, honesty, what it means to be a hero. You bow to no one, my friends. Just the expansion of this world is absolutely insane. I don't know how Tolkien did it. I don't know how he imagined it, but I'm so grateful he did. I don't know. I'm just getting a bit overwhelmed by all the emotions that I'm feeling right now, because it's now one of my favorite stories. Unpopular opinion, I guess. I'm not sure if that's unpopular or not. I love Tom Bombadil. Do not tell me you do not like him. Please, that breaks my heart. I mean, you can say it, but don't say it. Please, don't say it. He's amazing. He's amazing. He represents nonsense and pure joy and music and dance and... you know, some things you cannot explain. You cannot explain. He just exists in this world and it's wonderful. I love all the tree descriptions. I love them. I love them. You cannot get enough of them. Do not say that. Do not say that it's boring and slow because of all the trees. The trees are some of the most beautiful things we have in the world. What are you talking about? I need more of that. I need more trees. I need more nature. Give me all of that. Can I say one bad thing about this books? I don't think so. But the hobbits are my favorites, but I love the elves. I love Aragorn, of course. Hello, I love the dwarves. I love all the songs, the language. I just... Yes, it does have some slower chapters, but those are the best. There's so much here. I still need to get the other 2 books in this collection because they are too stunning for me not to get them. I love all the annotations that I have here, and I know I want to reread this. I started listening to the audiobook narrated by Andy Serkis, and I haven't finished. Why? Big mistake. I need to do this. I need to listen to that and all the other ones because it's perfection. I'm pretty sure it will be. I don't know what else to tell you. It's The Lord of the Rings. It's perfect. I love it so much. And now that reminds me that I definitely need to read more fantasy. I need to read more fantasy, like immediately. It's a priority. It needs to be a priority. Here are some of the books that I talked about during this video that make me so happy to look at. I feel like no matter how happy or sad they are, mainly sad because I love those, but no matter any of that, I feel like all of these, for some reason or another, have taught me a lot, have made me grow as a person and as a reader as well, and have, you know, come from recommendations that maybe I wouldn't have had otherwise. At least for some of these, that's definitely the case. And then again, this is just a reflection of all of these beautiful years that I've had here on booktube that have shown me a lot of different realities, a lot of different perspectives, and I'm so grateful for that. I hope I can keep learning always. It's never too late to do that. I hope I can keep, you know, receiving beautiful recommendations from all of you. That's the most beautiful thing about having a channel here, is the community, the conversations that we can have. I value that so much, and I hope you know that I appreciate each and every single one of you that's watching this video right now. Thank you all so much for watching and for supporting me over these years in no matter which form that is. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. And right now I'm gonna let you go because this is long enough. But thank you so much, and I will see you again hopefully soon enough next time on a new video or some reading sprints. Bye everyone!